Deeper into this report is Bill Mahoney. Bill, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
I should say Bill is of the New York Public Interest Research Group. He's their numbers whiz. So let's, because this is very complicated stuff, but it's also very important stuff when you think about it. You guys are basically backing up what the governor has said about having a 2% deviation in population from district to district. What does that mean exactly?
Well, basically, Governor Cuomo's bill says that the largest legislative district in each house can be no more than 2% larger than the smallest district. Thereby, you can't have these massive variations in population that we see now that mean that some legislators have to work to represent tens of thousands more people than some of their peers by the other side of the aisle.
Mm-hmm. So how does that work exactly? They're able to take these districts, draw kind of what we see now as this kind of jigsaw puzzle it's been described as, where you've got some districts that run, east to west very narrowly, but essentially what they do is they try to cram certain people into these districts, shoehorn them in there, and that essentially what winds up happening is incumbents are protected.
Yeah, what they do in the Senate, for example, New York City is overwhelmingly Democratic. Most of the regions of the city go towards Democrats nearly 100% of the time. So they'll make each of those districts a little bit larger, so there will be one or two less Senate districts representing New York City than there ideally should be, while some of the more Republican areas of the state, such as Long Island and central New York, will be smaller, so therefore they can squeeze more members into there and get more representation to better benefit their parties rather than the people of the state of New York. And we have been opposed to this, and that's why we're supporting strongly Governor Cuomo's proposal to limit their ability to do such a thing.
Okay, and one thing that you found in your report, which I got to say is very, very thorough, is that over the last 25 years or so, the round of redistricting is done every 10 years based on the new census data. But over the last couple rounds of redistricting, we've seen these deviations in population from district to district actually increase.
Yeah, over the past 3 redistricting cycles, they've grown dramatically each time. And we think that's due to the fact that there's better technology available that lets legislators and their staffers better manipulate the data and draw the lines to benefit themselves. And they're taking full advantage of this to make the redistricting process worse than it ever has been, and that's saying quite a bit.
Right. So how do they do this? They're able to essentially, it's a process called geocoding, where they're able to look at the demographics of a district, see where Republicans predominantly live, where Democrats predominantly live, and then are able to kind of draw around these folks, and that's where you get some of the more funny-looking Senate districts, some of the more funny-looking Assembly districts.
Yeah, when they're drawing these districts, political realities such as party enrollment and incumbent protection and where these incumbents live, all of those factors are of much higher priority for them than realities of keeping communities together, such as towns or similar demographics in neighborhoods. They focus nearly entirely on nothing but protecting the incumbents who currently sit in their party.
Now, we should say that the members of LAT4, which is the Legislative Redistricting Commission that's led by lawmakers, they would dispute a lot of these claims, saying that they're following the law, they're following the Department of Justice requirements, and there's a lot of laws, a lot of requirements that go into this, and there usually lawsuits result from this round of redistricting as a result of what LAT4 does, and I'm sure we're already seeing some lawsuits on this. So essentially what's interesting about this is you've got LAT4 saying that the Voting Rights Act is being followed, and that's the main concern.
Yeah, they toss out all sorts of excuses saying why they can't do redistricting reform. They really don't want to end their 6.5-month vacation to come back to deal with this issue, which they promised voters would be dealt with this session. So they have tossed out excuses saying, oh, we can't do Governor Cuomo's proposal because of X. One of those things, as you mentioned, is a Voting Rights Act, where they say that they cannot limit deviation because of their desire to best represent minorities in the state. But what we found is there's absolutely no link between representing minorities and the population in districts. Those that represent different demographic groups that are in the minority have the same exact population on average as those that represent white majority districts.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about LAT4 and the whole concern about how they're going to wind up drawing these districts. The governor has given kind of varying degrees of what he plans to do with these lines. Sometimes he's said, and I think he said on a radio show, that he would veto the lines because he considers them automatically to be political. And then I think within the next several hours, he said in another interview that, well, maybe some sort of deal or agreement can be worked out. Lawmakers in both parties have said, even some good government groups have said, that the time for an independent redistricting commission has more or less run out at this point. What's the best case scenario now?
Well, they've still got plenty of time. Right now, as I mentioned, they're in the middle of a vacation that's taking up the entire second half of 2011 instead of coming back to deal with this. But if they were to come back in the next couple of months, they could pass a bill that would create an independent commission similar to the one proposed by Governor Cuomo that would have plenty of time to draw the maps and hold public hearings and seek the input of people from throughout the state. We don't think it's too late for an independent commission, and we are still demanding one. No matter how much criteria you place on the districts, they'll still find a way to manipulate the districts and gerrymander them to best protect themselves. They'll still find some loopholes that will let them protect their own districts if they're drawing the lines themselves. So we're still demanding that they create an independent commission, which is the only way you can really see lines that represent people rather than politicians.
Is there a way that if the governor vetoes the lines, or if the governor doesn't veto the lines, rather, and basically comes out and says, like, okay, we're going to try and split the baby in two, if you will, and create something that's a fair process, maybe not an independent process, but something that is a little bit more fair. Is that a possibility at all? Can you conceive of something where non-gerrymandered lines are drawn by lawmakers?
I think it's difficult to say until we see exactly what his proposal would be. But in reality, the people who are drawing the lines already know all the things, such as where incumbents live and how the party enrollments in each district break out. I'm sure you or I could look at a map of New York State and with a pretty good idea label which areas are Democratic and which ones are Republican. And we haven't been spending the past year examining this data in detail. So even if they were to have these different restrictions, saying, for example, that legislators cannot take partisan enrollment into account while drawing the lines, they already know this. They already know how best to draw the lines to benefit themselves. So no matter what criteria you place, they're still going to find a way to use them to best help themselves.
Right. So, but I think what the governor has said also is that there would be lines drawn by the courts essentially. How exactly will that work? It's been kind of vague and like, well, I'll veto the lines and they'll go to the courts. Yeah. How will that work?
Well, the judicial branch has the ability to step in if they lose confidence that lines will actually be passed by the legislature and signed by the governor in time for them to be up and running for the primaries. Of course, we don't know right now when the primaries will be. That's still to be determined. It could be any time between June and September, depending on how the Federal MOVE Act works out in New York State.
Right.
But at some point, once he vetoes them, then the courts will probably begin to say, we don't think an agreement's coming together and we're going to start drawing our own lines. Now, sometimes in the past we've seen both the governor and the legislature can suddenly come to a deal then and find a way to draw lines that are acceptable to everybody. But it will add a lot more pressure for them to get something done quickly.
Mm-hmm. And earlier this week, and we mentioned before that already we're starting to see some lawsuits get started on this. Mm-hmm. Earlier this week, there was a hearing for what's become known as Little v. Latfor. It's the prison gerrymandering case where a group of Senate Republicans, mostly from upstate, are challenging the law that counts prisoners in their last primary residence, not mm-hmm. where they're living now in prison. Where do you see the outcome in this? One thing that the Senate Republican lawyers have argued is that this is going to create two different pools of census surveys.
Yeah, I haven't been examining this detail in too much depth. We don't work on that specific issue a lot, but hopefully they can come to a resolution. And I think the fact that this issue is still outstanding speaks to how much time is left for them to create an independent commission. One of the things that opponents of this have argued is that they're on a tight deadline right now, so there's no way they could start the process anew. They haven't even actually started the process yet because they don't even know which set of numbers they're working with. This just goes to illustrate how quickly they plan on actually doing this and how much time we actually have left before these lines need to be finalized. Mm-hmm.
And, also, maybe we're sounding a bit too cynical when it comes to how this process is done. Everyone says that this is a gerrymandered process, which is keeping incumbents in power. But as we've seen in the past, there have been times where, and this is back to your report, there have been times where lawmakers have tried to basically say behind the scenes, behind closed doors, how they are trying to draw these lines to keep people in power. You include a memo here from 2001. I believe this was actually made part of evidence in a past redistricting lawsuit, yes, where Senator Skelis, before he was majority leader, received a memo here about adding a 63rd Senate seat, and we're talking about having another 63rd Senate seat again. Basically, could you tell us just a little bit about what this memo says and just what does this kind of underscore?
Yeah, long story short, we've got 4 or 5 pages of memos here. Not once on here is any concern about how best to represent the people of New York represented. None of the factors that they're considering while drawing these lines that is mentioned talks about, oh, this could better help us represent this community or help us keep this town together.
Right,
the only factors they consider
power
are things that stay in power. When a proposal for adding a minority district on Long Island is tossed around, they shut that down because they're concerned it might have to force one of the Republicans who live in where the district would probably be out of office. And that's more important to them than protecting the rights of minorities.
Okay, Bill, we could go on and on about this. It's, I think, a fascinating topic. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I encourage everybody to go to Nightbrig's website and check it out because it is, I mean, it's a little numbers heavy, so if you weren't a math major like me, it may take you a little while, but it is very interesting stuff. So thanks very much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.